Week 2 is headlined by a pair of top 25 showdowns coming in Charlotte and in Ann Arbor. We'll touch that, along with nearly 30 other games on the Week 2 edition of the Phil Steele Show. Kyle Schassburger, Tripp Hurd, Phil Steele, the titan of the college football preview magazine world, the godfather himself. Follow him on Twitter, on X, at PhilSteele042. Make sure you follow the Varsity channel on YouTube. You can see us in video form. A lot of you have been following the show on the YouTube channel, the Varsity. We appreciate you, of course, wherever you podcast College Sports Now. You catch a weekly hit with him and Wayne Cook, Stephen Hartzell on Wednesdays on the College Sports Now feed. And then he gets an hour all to himself. Well, with us, a couple of mutants in Kyle Schassburger and Tripp Hurd. But we're glad to have Phil along for the ride. Something called the NFL starts tonight as well. I'm not too interested in that, Phil. I know you sort of are, but not really. Hey, football is all around us, so you've got to embrace it. And I know you're coming off a decent week, too, week 1, huh, Phil? You had 9 TVs with 9 games on at one time, no commercials, and you fared pretty well this opening weekend.
Yeah, went good for the first week, definitely. And so we're off to a good start this season. A little concerned about this DirecTV thing going on, but because that's where my actual office is set up, DirecTV.
So that does impact you. That was a question I had. What are we doing to circumvent this issue? What is the plan?
Well, my home office, I've got 8 big screens, and I've got cable set up there, so I'm going to probably end up being at the home office until they get this thing corrected, and might only be watching 8 games at a time. But I'll be taping the other ones.
Hey, nothing wrong with working from your home office. You know what I mean, Phil? There's nothing wrong at all with that.
Yeah, each of you are currently decked out with a better background than I am in the actual office that has no air conditioning at this point. I just cut off all the fans. The air conditioning is wounded. It works, but not effectively. So I just had to cut all the fans for the week 2 recording here in our showcase studios in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Tripp, I hope you have Peacock, too, for the Friday game, Eagles and Packers. Of course, that'll be the only mention of Green Bay on this podcast. Phil, let's move to the first of a few games we want to touch on Friday night here in week 2. BYU at SMU. The Mustangs are favored by 12. 55.5 is the total. 7 o'clock start on ESPN2. Cougars are 4-0 all-time against the Ponies. Second trip ever. First since 97 when these two were briefly WAC members. We've seen more of Kevin Jennings to this point. He played a lot more than Preston Stone last week. SMU seemed to have gotten right as they're in the midst of a 4-game home swing that culminates with that September 28th showdown against FSU. Second of 4 straight at home. Wide open ACC race at this point based on what we saw this past weekend, Phil. So I think SMU is going to look to build upon the momentum in working towards that end of September matchup towards FSU. Do you like the Ponies here in this spot at home?
Yeah, I lean with SMU in this one. I think when you look at SMU, that first game against Nevada doesn't look as bad. Nevada looked pretty good again last week with Troy. Maybe we've underestimated Nevada this year. Plus, it was chilly. It was 50 degrees and an unusual setup for them. They looked better last week against Houston Christian, and they're a team that likes to smack teams at home. Now, BYU did play really well down the stretch last year when they went against Oklahoma. They only lost by 7. Against Oklahoma State, they only lost by 6. And in both games, they could easily have won last year. So it's a little bit of a concern there, but I think SMU's a better team at home. My computer likes SMU in this one by a couple of touchdowns, so I'm going to lay the points with SMU.
Speaking of points, you'll probably see more points in that game than you will in the next one. We're going to talk about Duke at Northwestern. Last week, Duke topped Elon 26-3 at home. They missed the cover by a couple of points there, but the Texas transfer quarterback Malik Murphy looked pretty good. He had a good line, 26 of 40 through the air for 291, 2 touchdowns against 1 pick. This week, the Blue Devils head north. They're going to be a road dog at Northwestern. 2.5 is the spread. Northwestern got off to a 1-0 start in a slugfest last week over Miami, Ohio. They're playing in a temporary stadium, Martin Stadium. It's about a nice, crisp 7-iron from Lake Michigan. So it's going to be a little windy. I did my research, 18, 20-mile-an-hour gusts tomorrow night. That might affect a Duke offense that looked like it wanted to throw the ball in week 1. So maybe a slight lean with the home team here, only laying under a field goal, and might like a lot of unders in this temporary stadium they're playing with at Northwestern.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment completely, Tripp. That's really good. Elon, of course, kicked that late field goal last week, which helped them get the cover against Duke. But when you take a look at this matchup, I like Northwestern's defense. I like Duke's defense. Manny Diaz is a defensive sort of guy. You hit it right on the head. Last week, they threw the ball 40 times, only ran at 27. But this is a Northwestern team that benefited from both practices. They're at home, and I actually think they have a better home field edge here than they had at Ryan Field because the crowd's fuller, and they're right there on the lake, and I think they're excited to play there. So I like the home field edge that they have. I think Northwestern's a better team. The number is I like the under, but I also like Northwestern minus the points. It's a short number here, and I think they're the better team at home.
And Duke has had some recent success, too, against the Wildcats. They've been playing them a lot recently. You can catch each of those games on the Varsity Network app, out-of-market games, whether you're out of town, want to keep up with live college sports. Be sure to download the free Varsity Network app, available for both Apple and Android. Listen to college sports live with the Varsity Network app. Tripp, you bring up 7-irons. I pulled mine out a couple times yesterday. Played at Ocala, got 18 holes in, first time in a couple of months. I had 5 kick-in birdies, missed all of them. Still broke 90, shot an 89. Yes.
Good for you.
Not good. The alma mater is in action. Phil, I can't find a number. I want you to plug, though, the FCS inside the press box, if you will. PhilSteele.com is where you can get a bevy of additional information. But my Western Illinois Fighting Leathernecks on the road at Indiana, 7 o'clock, Big Ten Network. Tell me about the newsletter, though, Phil.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, the Inside the Press Box newsletter, we give a complete write-up on every FBS versus FCS game out there during the course of the week. My computer projects the box score of the game as well. And we also have the FCS magazine, which gives you 2 full pages on every FCS team. Western Illinois didn't fare too well last year, did they, Kyle?
No, it's been a dark time for WIU. Not as bad as what FSU has fallen into, but Western doesn't care about sports, okay? They moved from the SEC of the FCS, from the Missouri Valley Football Conference, to now what? The Ohio Valley? It's tough. It's tough. They played at Northern Illinois last week. Last time they played them was my junior year of college. I remember I celebrated my 21st birthday in DeKalb, and they got throttled last week, 54-15 against NIU. But hey, Phil, Kurt Signetti, first IU coach to win a debut in the Hoosier State since 2007.
Yeah, and I tell you what, at James Madison, you like to put the hammer down when they had the advantage. I think they could do that here. And Western Illinois, I believe their last win was 2021 against Illinois State.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's been a while. It's been a while.
But I do want to remind you, FCS magazine, 2 full pages, every single team, $25. You're an instant expert on every FCS team. Go to philsteele.com, click on the digital magazine, get it right now for $25. It's an amazing amount of information that we put in there. And frankly, I'm surprised more FCS fans are not flocking to this thing.
Yeah, no 7, Signetti winning the first game in a debut for an IU coach. That was my freshman year in college. So here we are dating ourselves. Texas and Michigan, one of the 2 headliners on the weekend, probably the number 1 marquee game. The other is Tennessee and NC State in Charlotte, but Texas and Michigan, top 10 showdown. What more do you need to say? First trip ever to the Big House for the Longhorns. First regular season meeting between these two. Horns are laying 7, 42.5 is the total, 12 o'clock on Fox. It's a big noon kickoff game. Texas has won 7 straight true road games, Phil, winning 5 of those against the spread. Horns smoked Colorado State. Wolverines underwhelmed in a 30-10 victory over Fresno State, and did so with Davis Warren starting, not Alex Orji. A little bit of a curveball from Sharon Moore. Both Warren and Orji played, throwing touchdown passes. You believe Texas can cover the 7 on the road in Ann Arbor?
Yeah, I'm leaning with Texas in this one. I tend to shy away from the marquee games, but this is a Texas team that handled the road trip to Alabama last year. Came out of there with a 10-point win. Very impressive in the opener. I actually leaned with Colorado State last week, and Texas just annihilated them. You knew that thing was over at the half when it was 31-0. They had 309 yards offense in the first half. And if you watch last week's games, you're going to definitely knee-jerk to Texas because Michigan didn't look good. They were only up by 6 in the fourth quarter, scored a late touchdown, then got the interception return for a touchdown. They're running 2 different types of offense, pro style with Davis Warren, and then the spread option with Alex Orji. Orji only threw 2 passes last week, one of them a short touchdown pass, but they basically running the ball with Orji and throwing the ball with Warren when he's in there. So I think it's interesting. It's tough to give the defending national champ 7 points at home, but Texas just does look like the better team. They're more experienced. So I'm going to lean with the Longhorns in this one, but not one of my best plays of the week.
We should have a good one in Stillwater this week. Both teams, Arkansas and Oklahoma State, impressed in week one. The Hogs hanging 70 points on Arkansas Pine Bluff. The Pokes with a nice cover over South Dakota State. Good call on that one, Phil. Oklahoma State's the home favorite here. The line's 7.5. I think they're going to have their hands full with Taylon Green, though, and we could see some points in this one as well. The total's up to 63.
Yeah, and I like Oklahoma State this year. I think they're one of the best teams in the Big 12. Alan Bowman should be a much improved quarterback. Last year he had a 15-14 ratio. This year it's already 3-0. And that was a good South Dakota State team that they played last week, maybe the best team in the FCS. And they handled it pretty handily. They led 17-6 at the half and rolled by 24. But this Arkansas team is different. And the thing about Sam Pittman as a head coach, don't make him an underdog because he'll have his team surprised. Go back to last year. Arkansas wasn't very good last year. They had a banged up KJ Jefferson. They didn't have Rocket Sanders. And they had the toughest 4-game road trip in college football. All games on the road, at LSU, playing Texas A&M in Arlington, at Ole Miss, and at Alabama. And that was with a poor football team that struggled all year. And yet, they almost beat LSU, only lost by 3. They almost beat Alabama, only lost by 3. And they almost beat Ole Miss. They only lost that one by 7. All games they were in. So they tend to really play these games good. They've done it throughout Pittman's career. They're an away dog here. I think they hang within this one and potentially even pull the upset. But like I said, I'm very bullish on Oklahoma State this year. I think they're one of the best in the Big 12. So I'll call for them to get the straight up win in Stillwater, but I'll take the points with Arkansas.
Embrace the Hog is the rallying cry for Sam Pittman and the Razorbacks this year. I love it. He rolled that out at SEC Media Days. I've littered all of the production and radio imaging with it as I helped to manage and run point for the Arkansas Razorbacks network from Learfield. So, yeah, embrace the Hog, and I expect them to keep that tight. That should be a good slugfest out in Stillwater coming up at 12 o'clock on ABC. K-State was an underdog the last time that they went to the Crescent City to take on Tulane in 1988. They were a 21-point dog and lost 20-16. So they covered, but these two teams just played 2 years ago, and Tulane won. They stunned the Wildcats in the Little Apple en route to that Cotton Bowl winning season. Phil, you're high on the Wildcats with OK State right behind, and then Utah, the favorite, as are most people, favorite out of the Big 12. They've got a dozen starters back, a schedule that, according to your magazine, 30th year, most accurate college football preview magazine that's out there, 40 points better. That schedule is, according to the mag. You like them enough to cover the 9 on the road with quarterback Avery Johnson against a John Summerall-led Wave team.
Yeah, I wasn't blown away with Avery Johnson last week, even though they beat UT Martin 41-6. They only had 17 points at the half, but I do think he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12 this year and a dangerous weapon. But Tulane impressed me last week. John Summerall's doing a good job there. Mensa was the surprise starter over Ty Thompson at quarterback, hit 10 to 12 passes. They pretty much handled Southeast Louisiana, led that one 21-0 at the half and a 52-0 win. I think it's a dangerous spot for K-State, and the fact that they're not a great away favorite. They've got a Friday night game against Arizona on deck. It's not a conference game, but, it is a conference game because it's Arizona. So it's a big game. So I think I got Kansas State winning this one by 7. I was going to let Vegas decide who I like. And I guess Vegas decides that I lean a little bit with Tulane in this one, plus the points.
Phil, I want to know how you really feel about Georgia Tech right now. It's a noon kick on Saturday in the JMA Wireless Dome. They're taking on Syracuse. Back on the road again. The Yellow Jackets have really put some travel miles in the first couple of weeks of the season. Maybe that's why the odds makers think that's going to slow them down a little bit. They're only a 2.5-point favorite against a Syracuse team that didn't look very sharp in week 1 in a win over Ohio. I think it's going to be pretty tough for the Orange to slow down that Yellow Jacket backfield, though. Haynes and Haynes, they look pretty tough so far. Yeah,
and last week, Anthony Tyus for Ohio U had over 200 yards rushing against his Syracuse defense. If you watch the game in the first quarter, I believe Ohio had like a 9-1 first down edge, but kept settling for field goals, and that was their problem in the game and the reason that Syracuse was able to win. But Syracuse also had their opportunities to cover. They got the long pass down to the 4-yard line that was called back on a penalty, or else it might have had a chance. The line was 16 and a half at game time. But in this one, I do think Georgia Tech, running the football is going to be tough for Syracuse to stop. They allowed 6.5 yards per carry last week. They shouldn't be able to slow down Georgia Tech's rush attack. I think it'll probably be on the higher scoring side. But I'm keeping with Georgia Tech, even though it's a tough road trip here. Like you mentioned, going from Ireland all the way to Atlanta, now out to New York. It's pretty tough travel, but I'm going to go with Georgia Tech. Been more impressed with them this year.
Cincinnati is a slight 2-point favorite at 12 o'clock on ESPN2 at home against Pitt. It's the River City rivalry. 62.5 is the total. These two teams played last year. Cincy won for the fifth time in the last 6 meetings, 27-21 at Pitt last year. But Scott Satterfield's squad allowed 435 yards to FCS member Towson last week. Now, I do think it's important to note redshirt junior defensive tackle Dante Corleone, an All-American in 2022. He's been cleared to play in this game. He missed last week. He's been dealing with blood clots in his lungs since early in the summer. So that certainly could provide a boost to that defensive front against Pitt. Phil, I was kind of surprised. Tripp, you were there in Charlotte with me. It wasn't Nate Yarnell that got the nod at quarterback for Pitt. Instead, it was Eli Holstein. Holstein paid it off, threw for 336 yards and 3 scores. He looks to be the guy, as Pat Narduzzi gave him the nod. And man, Phil, that Cade Bell offense was humming last week for Pitt.
Yeah, it sure was. And, you look at the score at the half, 28-14, and you're like, it's an okay game. But in reality, Kent got that fumble punt return for a touchdown. And Pitt actually had a 329 to 48-yard edge at the half. And that offense, I love watching Desmond Reed. He's a shorter running back, but he's well-versed in the offense. Comes over from Western Carolina as well. And he's somebody that when he gets in the hole, he'll run you over. So he's short, but he's powerful. And then, as you mentioned, Eli Holstein, wow, 30-40 last week, over 336 yards passing. So this is a very potent offense for Pitt. I think a much improved offense for Pitt. The defense was better than it would look with the 24 points allowed last week. But I'm also bullish on Cincy. I was a little disturbed about the defense. I do like the fact that Corleone could return. He just got back to practice, so he's got to have 2 good days of practice to see if he plays here. But hopefully he does. But I think we have 2 vastly improved teams this year. I'm going to lean with Cincinnati at home, but I think we have 2 play-on teams. So this wouldn't be one of my top plays of the week.
In that win over Kent State for Pitt, too, Desmond Reed. How about that guy who followed Cade Bell from Western Carolina? All-purpose kick returner, running back, 231 all-purpose yards, 2 TDs. He had a 78-yard punt return for a touchdown, too. That guy's electric. He'll be fun to watch this season. Tripp, take us to Memphis.
Yeah, let's go off the radar for a second here. A noon kick. It's Troy on the road at Memphis. The Trojans lost a close one at home last week to Nevada. Memphis, they had a cupcake in their opener over North Alabama, 40-0 the score there. But Memphis needs to cover 19 in this one, and they're in a bit of a look-ahead spot because they've got Florida State on deck. I don't know if we can still call that a look-ahead anymore, the way Florida State's looking to start the season. But with that game on deck, is that enough to give you a little bit of a lean in this one here?
Yeah, I think 2 things have me leaning a little bit with Troy. I've got Memphis winning the game by 17, so I'm leaning a little bit with Troy. The 2 things would be this. Satterfield always wins his home games, but he has trouble covering. He's a poor home favorite. And I do think Florida State's start gives Memphis a lot of look ahead to next week, because now Memphis is really thinking, hey, we can beat Florida State. And they're also taking on their ex-head coach there in Norvell. So I think when you add it all up, the situation favors Troy. Troy last week jumped out to a 14-0 lead. Looked like they were going to smack Nevada like everybody thought they would. But then Nevada really outplayed them. Troy had to come back late in the game just to pull within 2 and missed a 2-point conversion at the end. Wasn't overwhelmed with Troy, but I think the situation favors them this week. And not going to overreact completely yet to that loss to Nevada. So I lean a little bit with Troy plus the points. I got Memphis by 17.
Phil, Georgia won their 40th straight regular season game last week in a complete demolition of Clemson. Now, you got this game highlighted in red. I know what that means, just like Phil Steele Plus. If you go to philsteele.com to get more information about Phil Steele Plus, which is a $99 value, all the year-by-year results, game-by-game analysis. Green means good, red means bad. Certainly the tool that any college football fan would want to add to their arsenal for any season in addition to the magazine. But Phil, I'm curious just if you can wax a little bit on what the Bulldogs were able to do. They host Tennessee Tech, which, by the way, they're 53.5-point favorites, the largest spread that they're being asked to cover in school history. I think it's the fourth time they've been favored by 50-plus ever. It's hard to rationalize any action. I get that, Phil, but tell me, how impressed were you with Georgia's effort last week in Atlanta over Clemson?
Yeah, very impressed with Georgia. And for this one, I'm going to want to show the screen as far as what's on Phil Steele Plus for it. But yeah, Georgia's second half was dominant. In fact, everybody's saying Clemson has a poor offense, but Clemson's not going to have to face Georgia's defense again this year. I think we'll see Clemson's offense be better as the season goes on. But the one thing I want to point out here, I had no interest in this game whatsoever until when you look at philsteele.com and you click on the opponent down here, what pops up is the last 27 years matchup. And there we go. And let me increase it a little bit here just to get it to where you can actually see something. And the one thing I want to point out when it's an FCS matchup here, it shows you can see that Georgia has won all their games. But look at this red. If this column is in red, that means they have not covered. Georgia has not covered a game against an FCS team for 8 straight. While the spreads have all been up here, you can see what the scores are. They have not been covering. So they do not cover these games, 8 in a row. And that means Tennessee Tech. By the way, Tennessee Tech's head coach, Bobby Wilder. And last week they almost beat Middle Tennessee State. So, I mean, the spread of 53.5, Georgia tends to put their walk-ons on at the end of the game in games against the FCS. I actually lean with Tennessee Tech plus the huge points here.
I love it. That's great. And great illustration as well, Phil Steele Plus, and what it can provide for all those that are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Be sure to go to the Varsity channel on YouTube as well and watch the Phil Steele Show each and every week. You'll get some behind-the-scenes sneak peek looks at what Phil Steele Plus can provide. Let's jump to the light of the afternoon, shall we, Phil? It's not a Big 12 matchup. I initially thought it was the Big 12 opener, but in digging deeper, Baylor and 12th ranked Utah is not. It's a return game from something that was already on the schedule when the Utes made the trip to Waco last year, and they narrowly won that game. What was it, 20-13, a game without Cam Rising, who returned last week. And boy, did he star. 5 touchdowns, 3 to Brant Keithy in his first action since 2012. Again, returning the game from their trip to the Brazos River last year. Second meeting all time between these two, Phil. Utah is favored by 14.5 at home at Rice-Eccles in front of the Moss. 54.5 is the total, 3:30 on Fox. Utes smashed Southern Utah 49-0. Bears impressed 45-3. It's against Tarleton State, but we got our first look at Daquan Finn at quarterback, the Toledo transfer, who made a quick impression with a 39-yard rushing TD on the first drive.
Yeah, and the new offense that Baylor's put in this year. When I talked to Coach Aranda, he said that this offense would accentuate the positives of a player like Richard Reese at running back and Finn at quarterback, and it sure looked good in the opener. As you know, I'm very high on Utah. Utah actually came rising at 5 possessions, 5 touchdowns passes last week, and then out of the game. Utah has only lost 2 home games in the last 5 years. I like the Utes to win this one, but I kind of like 14 points. I don't think Baylor's a bad team. And, last year's game, while Rising did not play, Utah's only lead of the game happened in the final seconds when they scored a touchdown to take their first lead of the game, which gave them the 7-point win, 20-13. So Baylor's going to have a good defense with Aranda calling the shots and improved offense. And I've got Utah winning it by about 14. I actually have no interest in this game. I think once again, you have 2 play-on teams. I'm going to look for better spots down the road to play on both these guys.
I thought I had a really good spot last week, Phil. I tweet out my picks every Saturday morning. I had 4 picks. I missed on one. It was Iowa. I had the under. I like a good Iowa under. Looking great at halftime. It's 6-0. It's the same old Iowa. The Hawkeyes explode for 5 touchdowns in the second half. They put up 34 points. You got to go back through the last 5-6 games of last season for Iowa to match that kind of offensive output. But this week, they've got a rivalry game. Iowa State coming to town. Iowa's owned this series here lately. They've won 8 out of the last 10. Hawkeyes favored by 2.5, and the total's getting lower. It's coming down 35.5. I mean, if there's anything better than a Service Academy under, it's got to be this game, right?
Yeah, once again, if you click on the screen right now, I can show you the series history on this one. And the beautiful thing about Phil Steele Plus, it's color coded green and red. Green is good, red is bad. But look over here in the total over under section. 17 unders, 2 overs. So yeah, this thing tends to go under. We see that Iowa's actually won 7 of the last 8 meetings. And while they don't cover all that as much, I mean they've got a nice spread record. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, and 1. A lot of the games are close, but I like the fact that Iowa's 2.5. I'm surprised at that number. I feel I was the better team at home series history. They should be favored by over a field goal. So if you're looking for line value, I think you get it at Iowa -2.5. They are the better team at home and have dominated the series. But my favorite play is probably the under. I know the total's down at 35. Heck, last year was 36 and still went under the total. 17-2 to the under. As you touched on, it's like a service academy game. So I'm going to go with under in the Iowa State game. And then I'll lean with Iowa just due to the line value of the spread. They should really be a 3.5, 4-point favorite, and they're laying under a field goal.
As our fearless leader, Stephen Hartzell, said on the first regular season edition of the College Football Blitz, which you can hear on Sirius XM radio throughout much of the day until 6, 7 o'clock, even close to 8 o'clock on some Saturdays. 12 hours of wall-to-wall, red zone style type play-by-play drop-ins across the country. New year, same Iowa offense. Although, however, hitting the over late, as Tripp alluded to. Looking for more college football action following any broadcast, your own broadcast, make sure you turn in to the Varsity Network app on Saturdays. Audio version, NFL Red Zone channel every Saturday to noon to midnight Eastern. Just search College Football Blitz on the Varsity Network app.
Hey, quick note on Iowa. 3 touchdown passes to wide receivers last week. Last year, they had 3 touchdown passes to wide receivers all year.
It was a bad beat. It really was. I consider it a bad beat. All right, moving on. 3:30 kick in Jordan-Hare Stadium, a rematch from a close game last year with Cal and Auburn. Last year, Cal was a 5-point dog. This year, they're heading to a tough environment. The line's at 13.5 is what I've been seeing. Cal didn't look great last week against UC Davis. Auburn, they looked a little sharper. Peyton Thorne had a nice game. What do you like here, Phil? Can Auburn get the cover at home, or do you like Cal to hang around?
Well, I tell you what, Auburn sure looked great last week. And, part of the reason that Peyton Thorne struggled last year was a below average receiving core. And when I talked to Coach Freeze going over the team with him, he said this is a vastly upgraded receiving core. They brought in the Freeze 4, brought in some transfers as well. And they sure looked like it last week. I mean, they had 436 yards at the half. Granted, Alabama A&M. So tough to go against Auburn, especially in Jordan-Hare. But I'm actually going to take the points here because Wilcox is one of the best head coaches as an away dog. He's 17-9 in that role. Cal's actually been a non-conference away dog 7 times in the last 10 years. They're 7-0 against the spread. And as you pointed out, last year when these two teams played, Cal actually had the yardage edge, 273 to 220. They also had the first down edge, 19-12. Really a tough loss at home for Cal. They feel they can win this game, so they're coming in with a good attitude. They're in their best role under Justin Wilcox. His best spread role is away dog. I'm going to take the away dog here. I like Cal plus a 13. Keep it tighter than expected.
Bragging rights game between the Atlantic Coast Conference here and the Southeastern Conference. All of a sudden, let's stay on some SEC turf. Kentucky will go to the Commonwealth. They host South Carolina. Wildcats are laying 10, 43, low total, 43, 330 on ABC. Kentucky won 31-0 in a lightning-shortened game. Hope you didn't have the over in that one against Southern Miss. They called in the third quarter. Didn't kick until 10:05 Eastern time, originally scheduled for 7:45. The start there in Lexington. Brock Vandegrift, Georgia transfer, makes his debut for the Cats, threw for 3 touchdowns. The freshman, the Rec Specs dude, Lenora Sellers for South Carolina, he struggled. 10 of 23, 114 yards, carried 22 times for 68. And the Gamecocks chased in 2 ODU fumbles inside the 10 to score the only 2 touchdowns in a 4-point win over the Monarchs. Phil, home team has won 10 of 15 straight up in ATS, according to the magazine. South Carolina, though, 1-4 straight up, 3-2 in road openers.
If you did have the over last week in that game, you got bailed out because in Vegas, it's not an official game unless it gets to the final 5 minutes of the game. So no tickets were cashed in that one. And then when you take a look at this matchup, Kentucky was more impressive last week, 31 points in 2.5 quarters. against Southern Miss. South Carolina, as you mentioned, they were downright ugly at times against Old Dominion, barely escaped with the win. However, I thought this game was close prior to the season, and I'm not going to completely switch my assessment on both teams based on one game. I think South Carolina may be looking ahead to Kentucky, LSU, their next two games. Then Old Dominion, they're going to have to get the offensive line getting better. They're going to have to get Sellers, who only hit 10 to 23 passing, to play better. But I think South Carolina's going to make a game of it. I do think it'll be a lower scoring game, despite the fact there might be value in the over, and the fact that Kentucky only ran 42 plays last week, and maybe that's factored into the lower total. But I like South Carolina plus the points in this one. Keep it closer than expected.
Phil, you held out on us last week to the very end of the show when you just pulled Maryland out of the sky and dropped that as your top play of the week. And I was in the Blitz studio working on the show Saturday. I just happened to look at the TV behind me, and the Terps are just axe murdering UConn. I think the final score 50-7 looked like an absolute juggernaut. You don't have to be shy with those picks. If there's one you really like, go ahead and tell us. But this week, Terps back at home. They'll host Michigan State. Maryland's a 9-point favorite. They've won the last two in this series. They've covered in those games as well. What do you like here?
Yeah, and the thing I like about Maryland is what they do at the start of the season. You look at their first two games of the year under Loxley, they average about 50 points per game. And, they did it again last week with 50 points against Connecticut. So I like what I saw to Billy Edwards. And, everybody has this opinion of Billy Edwards. He's a running quarterback because he was brought in to run the football last year. But you didn't take the ball out of the hands of Tagliavola with that, to have Edwards throw. So he was a running quarterback last year, but he can throw the ball, hit 20 of 27, got a solid receiving core, got Hemby in the backfield. I'm bullish on this Maryland team this year. And to me, Michigan State's in a rebuilding mode. I like Florida Atlantic plus the points last week. They played a good game against Michigan State. It was as tight as the score would indicate. I think Michigan State going on the road. Aiden Childs last week only hit 10 to 24 passing. I like Maryland minus the points over Michigan State this week.
Phil, I think Tripp has had some trouble finding the FCS-related lines, which I don't blame him. Most people, don't get too bogged down in the details. So I'm curious if there's any intel with Idaho playing at Wyoming, because the Cowboys really let me down last week. I thought they would play a lot. They would play a lot better at Arizona State. Instead, they fell 48-7 in the desert. I don't know if you're going to touch this one with even a single hair on that magnificent mustache that you have. We both do. I'm not going anywhere with any of my mustache hairs. But important to note, Cowboys have won 7 of 8 against Idaho, but they're only 1-5-1 ATS against the FCS since 2016. So maybe don't get too ambitious here.
Yeah, and Idaho lost their starting quarterback last week. So I think they're down to the backup quarterback. That could be tough. Wyoming's at home, need a big win. But believe it or not, when Wyoming plays FCS teams, they're actually 12 straight unders. Now, granted, Craig Bowl was the head coach. Now a different head coach in Jay Sawvell, who, by the way, is going to go for it on fourth down more often. But that was really a poor performance against Arizona State. I thought Wyoming was going to give Arizona State a game, and it was 48-0 when Wyoming went and scored a garbage touchdown in the final minute. So 48-7 is being kind to Wyoming for last week's performance.
Yeah, that's a 3:30 game on True TV, also a Max game. So, Tripp, did you have a Virginia Tech play? Did I delete something in the doc? Go wherever you want to go next.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Virginia Tech for a second. Marshall on the road, taking on the Hokies this week, 4:30 kickoff in Lane Stadium. Virginia Tech's favored by 20.5. Not too many teams outside of my Seminoles had a worse open or a worse opener than Virginia Tech. They were favored by 2 touchdowns on the road at Vandy. They end up losing in overtime. I mean, is this a bounce back spot for the Hokies here, Phil?
You would think so at home, but I do think Marshall is a pretty good team. And, they used both Stone Earl and Braylon Braxton. Braxton, of course, a Tulsa transfer last week. I think they've got upgraded quarterback play. A.J. Turner looked pretty good running the football. And I'm pretty bullish on Marshall. The difference, 2 years ago, Marshall had a really good defense. And then when I was talking to Coach Huff last year, he's like, Well, Phil, we're going to be different on defense. We don't have the players up front that we had 2 years or last year. And Marshall's defense suffered, and Marshall suffered last year. They had an off year. This year, he's much more bullish on the defensive line. So I think the defensive line might be back to 2 years ago standard. I think Virginia Tech's in a good situation. Home opener, off a loss. You need to prove something. But I only had Virginia Tech by 20. The line's at 20.5. So I have no interest in the game. Do you have something on this one, Tripp?
Of course he does.
Might be a little bit of a bounce back here. I might lean a little bit with the Hokies right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Let's move to the evening slate. We'll get to Tennessee and NC State, but I want to start with ECU, your most improved team, Phil. They looked good, but it was Norfolk State. They also turned the ball over 6 times. They were 6 times, yet they were able to win 42-3. Jake Garcia threw 4 touchdown passes, and ECU is favored by 2.5. Might appear cheap, but given the 6 turnovers, and they're on the road at an Old Dominion team, 55 to total, 6 o'clock at ESPN Plus. We've already chronicled the hell that the Monarchs gave the Gamecocks in Columbia. So what do you think about this one? The Pirates have won 5 straight against ODU overall, and the over 55 is hit in the last 4 of 5.
Yeah, and I think when you take a look at this matchup, how do you go against Old Dominion and Ricky Ronnie? I mean, this is a guy that every year you pick Old Dominion at the bottom, and all of a sudden they're in a bowl game. 2 out of his 3 years, he's remarkably got to a bowl and gave South Carolina everything they wanted. But I'm really bullish on this East Carolina team. Don't like the fact that Garcia tossed 3 interceptions and they lost 3 fumbles last week. But to have 6 turnovers and still win a game 42-3, I think that tells you the type of talent East Carolina has. So as long as they hold on to the ball, I do think the Pirates go on the road and get the win. Tough to go against Ricky Ronnie. It's great as an underdog, but I'm going to lean with East Carolina minus the points in that one.
In his 10th year at Sam Houston State, Casey Keeler and the Bearcats slapped Rice around last week, 34-14. Let's not forget Sam Houston State is a former FCS team. I mean, they've made the full transition now, but they just went to Houston and smoked the Owls. Gus Malzahn, KJ Jefferson and company ran roughshod over New Hampshire, 57-3. They rushed for 454 yards. First ever meeting between these two since 2017. The Knights are 7-1 straight up, 5-3 against the spread in non-conference home games against the FBS. The matchup, Sam Houston State at UCF. Knights are favored by 22 is what I'm seeing, 58 the total, 6:30 on ESPN Plus. Last non-conference loss to a G5 team for UCF in non-conference play came in 2015 to FIU.
Interesting. And I don't think they're going to lose this one, especially not at home at Bright House. But when you look at UCF, explosive on offense, and they've got a deep running back core. They've got Harvey, they've got Penny Boone, they got Miles Montgomery. KJ Jefferson looked okay for his first game, probably a little rusty. I think he'll get better. Sam Houston's a pretty good team. Hunter Watson showed me a lot last week. He had 18 of 27 passing, had 57 yards rushing. So he looked pretty good at the quarterback spot. And remember, last year they opened up the season with a couple of zeros or 0-3 in their first couple of games, and then got better as the season went on. So I think it's going to be a good game. I got UCF winning this one, probably by about 3 scores. So lean a little bit with Sam Houston plus the points.
All right, next game up, South Florida at Alabama. Bama rolled in week 1. I do want to shout out to Western Kentucky very briefly here. Western Kentucky, I know it didn't go great for them on the field Saturday night, but they looked great. Their uniforms, out of everything I saw Saturday, they were clean, they were sharp. It was just a classic look. Shass, I don't know, did you happen to catch that at all?
I did not, but I have a uniform. Helmet. I have a uniform note on WKU EKU this weekend. Apparently, EKU is going to wear their white road jerseys. And WKU had already planned on this game being a whiteout back on July 10th when they announced all of their game day promotions on the schedule. But the visiting team said, no, we're going to wear white, and they're not buckling. But no, I don't want to take away from your shine from last week. WKU always looks good. I mean, one of the better mascots and images and just brands out there.
I just wish more schools would do what they do and go with that classic look. Just, I don't know. I liked it. Anyways, back to Alabama. They rolled in week 1. No sweat cover. I think they went 60 they scored 60 points, something like that. But anyways, they're back at home this week, South Florida in town. This game opened up a lot of eyes last year. If you remember, USF gave the Tide fits in the first half. The game got delayed. I think final 17-3, way closer than anyone would have expected there. Even though they won last year, Alabama did. Is this maybe a little bit of a payback spot for the Tide here in week 2?
Yeah, I don't think they take USF lightly. And remember, last year, it wasn't Jalen Milroe. They went with Buckner and Simpson, both were the starters, and it was rainy. And yeah, Alabama even needed a late touchdown to make it 17-3. It was not a pretty game whatsoever. But this is a different Bama team. Love the talent they have. I think that this year's Bama team has more talent than Washington had last year, and Washington made it all the way to the national title game. So look out for these guys. They do have Wisconsin on deck, but I don't think that's going to be a major look ahead. I'm bullish on South Florida. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the American. They may just even win the conference. We'll see how it goes this year. Byron Brown at quarterback is electric, but I'm not going against this Alabama juggernaut. They look really good. Great running back core, great defense, outstanding receivers, Jalen Milroe. Last week I liked Alabama. I'm going to stick with Bama this week.
Phil, Kansas and Illinois have not played a football game in Champaign since the birth of the Jacuzzi Whirlpool hot tub. That came in 1968. I did my research. Yes. Okay.
Nice.
Kansas jumped out. Kansas jumped out ahead 21-0 last year in Lawrence, ended up winning 34-23. Seventh meeting overall. Series is tied 3-3. All of Illinois wins, and I got this one out of the magazine. The Whirlpool nugget was, yours truly. I had to find that myself. But in the magazine, it shows that all of Illinois wins came between like 1916 and 1929 or something like that. So it's been about 100 years since Illinois has won a game. They don't play often. I get it. Brett Bielema against Lance Leopold. What do you think in this matchup? 7 o'clock on Saturday, FS1.
Yeah, and if you watch last year's game, I mean, Kansas just freaking dominated the game, top to bottom. It wasn't even close. And when I talked to Coach Bielema, I'm like, and normally I don't even go over games that much with the coaches. I'm usually just going over players. I'm like, Coach, you got Kansas week 2. Man, they really throttled you. And he's like, Phil, remember what happened 2 years ago with Virginia? And I thought back, and then, in Bielema's first year, they played Virginia on the road, and Virginia shredded them. I think the final was 42-14. If you watch that game, you felt it was like 56-7. They couldn't stop Virginia for nothing. And then the next year, they got Virginia at home, beat them 24-3. So I think that Illinois will come in confident. I love watching Fagan at running back. He's a big boy, like 245 pounds. I think Altmaier is a much improved quarterback this year. Had a nice 4-0 ratio in the opener. And Illinois is at home. I think that they get their revenge this week. I actually like Illinois to pull the upset here.
Yep, they're getting 5.5 points this week. Let's go back to the ACC. We've got a tight line in Winston-Salem on Saturday night. Wake Forest playing host to Virginia. The Deacs favored by 1.5. The total at 57, so we might see some points here. Last week, Wake knocked off North Carolina A&T, just narrowly missed a cover. It was a big line, 33 points. Virginia did get a cover last week against Richmond. These two haven't met since 2021, but Wake has won the last 5 meetings. They've covered in all of those as well, Phil.
Yeah, Wake 5-0 straight up and ATS in the series, so you got to like that. And last week, Kern got the start, and then Bachmeier came in. I think the first two possessions of the first half, Bachmeier did not score, but in the second half, I believe he had 5 straight scoring drives. So I think it's Bachmeier's job. He's got the receiving core, which is something. If you follow Clausen always has great receivers, but last year he didn't. They lost Donovan Green right prior to the year. I think that was a huge loss. Donovan Green's back. He's paired with Morin and Alexander. They've got Claiborne at running back. So I think it's your typical Wake team. They're at home. They've dominated the series at 5-0. And while I think Virginia is a much improved team this year, I like the line's cheap. Under a field goal at home for a series you've dominated, I like Wake Forest to get this must-win game at home. I'm going to take Wake minus the points.
Let's head to Reno for a rematch of the 1990 National Championship. That's 1AA, now known as the Football Championship Subdivision. Georgia Southern at Nevada. 3rd meeting overall. The other meeting in the series came in the 1986 FCS semifinals. So tremendous significant stakes have always been on the line. Here we got week 2 between some G5 schools in Georgia Southern and Nevada. Wolfpack won over the reigning Sun Belt champion in Troy, somewhat surprisingly, I think. I understand new head coach at Troy, but that was last week. So they got in the win column. Another Fun Belt team, Clay Helton's bunch, taking the trip after being on the losing ends in one of the more entertaining games last week, Phil, against Boise State, 56-45. Georgia Southern covered one of your hits that you had on our show, them in Maryland. What a game that was. They allowed, though, Ashton Genty to rush for 267 yards and 6 TDs on the ground. And then Sire Gaines, 12 carries, 110 yards and a score. But it's not the same rushing offense they're going against, albeit on the road against Nevada. What do you think about Georgia Southern covering what is just a single point? It's a mere coin flip. 59 the total, 7 o'clock. True TV and Max.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head with entertaining, but I don't know if I would call it completely entertaining. Georgia Southern leading in the fourth quarter, getting double digits. Yeah, this one's easy. Then they give up a touchdown on a long run, give up a touchdown. Then they go for it on 4th and 7 at their own 20. And Boise gets another touchdown. Now all of a sudden you're losing the game, and then Georgia Southern goes down and gets a touchdown for the backdoor, but shouldn't even have been in that position anyway. Yeah, but I like the offense. I like J.C. French at QB. I thought he had a great game against Boise, against a very good Boise team, one that I picked to be the Group of 5 representative in the playoff this year. Now they go on the road. Nevada has surprised me both their first 2 games. I leaned with SMU. I leaned with Troy against them. Nevada is outplayed. Brendan Lewis last year struggled under 50% of his passes, poor ratio. This year he's above 50% of his passes. He's got a perfect 2-0 ratio. Hasn't thrown an interception yet, but Coach Helton told me that this is by far his best Georgia Southern team he's had. They only have South Carolina State on deck. I like Georgia Southern to go on the road and get this win.
Let's talk Tennessee and NC State. I tried to tell you guys last week that NC State, their fans were just chirping a little bit too loud, and Western Carolina, they hung around in Raleigh until the fourth quarter. This week, it's a much taller test for the Wolfpack. They'll take on Tennessee and Charlotte. Tennessee took care of business last week, 69-3 over Chattanooga. They probably could have scored just however many points they wanted to score in that one. Their quarterback, Nico, not even going to try to say his last name. He looked very sharp, though. The whole team looked sharp. I'm kind of surprised that this line isn't a little bit higher for Tennessee. I'm seeing 8 right now. To me, I would think that's a little bit of value for the Vols, Phil.
Yeah, and I think heading into last week, Tennessee probably would have been about a 3-4 point favorite in the game. But after watching last week, Nico looked unbelievable, 490 yards in the first half. And NC State, they were losing to West Carolina, I believe, in the fourth quarter, and it scored the last 21 points of the game to pull out the win. But I can't completely overreact. I mean, just watching last week's games, yes, Tennessee should be favored by 14 points. But this is Dave Dorn. He's got a good NC State team. They've got Concepcion, a wide receiver. They got Jordan Waters at running back. They have Grayson McCall at quarterback. And maybe they were looking ahead to Tennessee. Much like, remember, SMU when they played Nevada? I think they were looking ahead maybe or taking it lightly. So I do like Tennessee to win the game, but I just don't want to overreact to last week's results. So I'm going to stay away from this one. I'm going to find out if Tennessee is really that good and NC State is not as good as we expected, or was that just last week's games?
See, now you're making me think maybe the Wolfpack or the sharp play here. Maybe I just need to
Possible.
totally reverse everything.
The values on them, yeah.
You can listen to both radio feeds of that one as well from Learfield on the Varsity Network app. Get Matt Chasnow in your veins, Bob Kessling for the Vol Radio Network. Go to syncmygame.com to find out how you can sync up that audio with your television screen as well. It's highly unlikely Dion loves corn. Huskers laying 7.5 in Lincoln against the Buffs, who have won 3 straight in the series. Colorado and Nebraska is the game. This is a 7:30 contest on NBC. 59 is the total. Buffs have won 3 straight in the series, Phil, which is the longest such streak since the 50s. There's always added commentary, oozing with opinions anytime Deion Sanders prime time is involved, even more when it's Nebraska week. So Nebraska's dominated all time, but again, lost the last 3. 23 unanswered points for Colorado a year ago to win 36-14 in Boulder. Shedeur Sanders last week, he was awesome. 445 yards, 4 TDs. Travis Hunter was uncautious. He had 3 touchdowns. But them needing that sort of effort against NDSU is not that encouraging, albeit I understand the Bison are an FCS power, but to barely hang on and win 31-26, I think was the final, and now go on the road to Nebraska, that's not too encouraging. Dylan Raiola wasn't asked to do much for the Cornhuskers last week, but I'm leaning Nebraska here, especially considering Colorado has had the swing most recently, scored the way they did a year ago, and now they're at home against Deion and Colorado. I think they muzzle Prime.
At home at night, so that crowd's going to be fired up. And I love the skill players that Colorado has. Shadur Sanders, Jimmy Horn, Travis Hunter, DeJounte Wester, love them. The rest of the team, the offensive line, the defense, not wild about it. And with Nebraska, I do believe they're a complete team this year. Raiola gives them a complete difference. Remember last year's game, the first 28 minutes, Nebraska pretty much controlled things, but they missed 2 field goals, they fumbled, they intercepted, and all of a sudden Colorado got 2 scores late in the half, turned it into a 13-0 halftime lead, and then rolled in the second half. This year, Nebraska has a vastly upgraded receiving core. I loved watching Isaiah Nayor when he was at Wyoming a couple years ago. He came in, they had 121 yards receiving. They've got the run game going. And Dylan Raiola is a guy that is well beyond his years. It's not really a true freshman. I mean, he's got a composure beyond that. And they're at home, so he doesn't have to worry about going into a hostile crowd. So I think Nebraska's offense vastly improved over last year, not turning the ball over like they did last year, have the better defense, have the better offensive line. I'm actually going to go with Nebraska minus the points in this game.
What do you think about the total here? It's 59. That seems kind of high for any game with Nebraska involved in it, but I don't know. I could see this turning into a high-scoring game.
Yeah, I'm more interested in Nebraska. Not really looking at the total, but if you like the total, Trip, I can be talked into that. But Nebraska does have a good defense.
All right, let's. We've got another team that put up a lot of points last week. Oklahoma. They had a cupcake in week 1. They beat up on Temple 51-3 this week. They've got Houston in town. Favored by another big spread here. They're favored by 29 over the Cougars. Phil, do you think Oklahoma can cover their second big spread in 2 weeks at home?
I do. I think when you look at Houston, now I got 12 TVs in front of me, right? So I'm watching the UNLV game against Houston. And in my head, while I'm watching these games, I like count good plays, bad plays. And I mean, UNLV could run the ball. They could pass the ball. Houston couldn't run the ball. Houston couldn't pass the ball. Good plays, bad plays were like 85% UNLV. And I kept looking at the TV. I'm like, why is that score 14-0? It should have been like 24-0. UNLV just absolutely dominated. At the end of the game, Houston drove down and got a garbage touchdown in the final minutes to make it appear close. In fact, I think UNLV only outgained them by 60 yards, which really I'm wondering about my eyes at that point because UNLV just dominated the game. So what I'm trying to say is Houston's not that good of a team this year. They're in a rebuilding mode. And Oklahoma didn't even have 400 yards offense last week. They need to get that offense going. So I like Oklahoma at home to roll over Houston this week.
And stay tuned. We just got a couple of minutes left. Phil will give his power plays. I wonder if that one will be one of his 3 for week 2. App State at Clemson. Tigers are laying 17-53 the total. 8 o'clock ACC Network. Home opener for Dabo Swinney and the boys. Clemson shellacked 34-3 to Georgia and Atlanta. App House DTSU 38-10. Mountaineers have never beaten the Tigers, but have covered their last 6 P5 road games, including upsets of A&M and North Carolina most recently. What do you think, Phil? Is App the sort of opponent? I don't think so. That might allow Dabo Swinney, Garrett Riley, and Cade Klubnik an opportunity to unlock the offense?
Yeah, Dabo wasn't happy they scheduled App State. He knows how tough they are and how they play in these games. Clemson's a team that is off a tough, an embarrassing loss. It was 6-0 at the half, but then got steamrolled in the second half. They need to put something on, but I got Clemson by about 17. What'd you say the spread was, Kyle?
I'm showing right at 17. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm staying off this game. I wouldn't go against App State, but in the same token, how do you go against Clemson, Death Valley off a loss?
All right, we got a few to chase to get right in the late night. So we got a handful of games. We'll try to run through these quickly. I'm going to give you 3 at once, Phil. Tell me if you got a strong lean on either of these. If you want to give me a side on each of them, go ahead, and then Tripp will take the last 2. We've got Utah State at USC. Trojans favored by 28. What a win for Lincoln Riley and the Trojans over LSU on Sunday night, a game that could have gone either way. So impressed with Moss at quarterback, the big plays, the improved defenses, which you called that, Phil. USC showed up. Now they're laying 4 touchdowns. That's an 11 o'clock game. Oregon State favored by 5 on the road at San Diego State. That's a 10:30 game on CBS Sports Network. Let's start with those two because they're a little bit of a Pac-12 infused West Coast flavor. Utah State at USC, Oregon State at San Diego State. Do you feel more strongly about either of those two, or do you have a pick for each?
I do. I'm going to go with the Utah State one. And, last week, Petrus, the starting quarterback for Utah State, got injured. They went to the pig farmer, Bryson Barnes. And Barnes actually had, I believe, 5 scores on 5 drives in the second half against Robert Morris. So after a lackluster start where they trailed 14-10 at the half, they came back and won comfortably. And the interesting thing here is Barnes was the quarterback for Utah last year when they upset USC, and that game was on the road at USC. And so Barnes actually had a good game throwing against USC, threw for over 200 yards, had a 3-1 ratio in the game. And USC, talk about a letdown spot. I mean, you're on a short week. You just played Sunday night. You got the whole world patting you on the back for a great job done. I think it's a letdown spot for USC. I'll take Utah State plus the 28.5.
Don't hate that at all. I'll tell you what, I hope anybody listening out there didn't have Texas Tech on their card last week. I mean, that game raised my eyebrows for sure. They went to overtime to beat Abilene Christian 52-51. They won by a point. The Red Raiders this week, they're heading to the Palouse to take on the Cougs of Washington State. Cougs cruised in week 1 over Portland State 70-30. They're only favored by 2.5 here at home. It's a big total, 65.5. I mean, it's hard for me to trust Texas Tech at all right now. I know we don't like to overreact to week 1 games, but it'd be hard for me to lay a bet on the Red Raiders.
Yeah, and what I've found is like teams that struggle really hard, really a lot against the FCS teams do rebound the next week and play better. So I expect Tech to be much better. It's tough to get your kids up to play an FCS opponent, and but I like Washington State in this one. And when I look at Washington State, I think they're trying to get into the Power 4 again. They need to be impressive. They need to impress somebody, and this is the type of game you get fired up for. Now, they do have the Apple Cup on deck. That worries me a little bit, but just the fact that Washington State will treat this like a big, big game. I don't know if Texas Tech will. And Texas Tech, I believe, is 3-8 against the spread on the road. So I'm going to go with Washington State.
All right, we'll sneak in one more game here in the late night session. Mississippi State on the road, late night trip to the desert to take on Arizona State. Both these teams cruised in week 1. Do you have an angle on this one?
I lean with Arizona State. They were overwhelmingly impressive last week against Wyoming. And remember last year they had that banged up offensive line. Now the offensive line is healthier. They've got Leavitt at quarterback doing well. And they've got Scatterbo at the running back spot. So they've got some talent. I think Mississippi State is in a little bit of a rebuilding year this year. Both teams picked at the bottom of their conferences. I'm going to lean a little bit with Arizona State at home at night. They were just so damn impressive last week.
It's beautiful. It's one of 8 games all kicking off after 10 o'clock Eastern. Wow. Then you got a 9 o'clock game, Southern Utah at UTEP. A lot of action in the late night. PhilSteele.com is where you can find him at PhilSteele042. Phil, you got 3 plays you feel strongly about in week 2.
Yeah, there's 3 that we covered already, so I don't have to say anything about them. I'll just tell you who they are. Wake Forest minus the 1.5 against Virginia. Oklahoma minus the 28.5 against Houston. And then Utah State plus the 28.5 against USC.
I was starting to lean Texas just to go big or go home. I know you stay away from the big games. I was going to go all in, but our conversation about Nebraska, I'm going to lay the 7 as well and take the Huskers at home over Colorado. I also like Duke going against Phil here, 2.5. They're an underdog on the road, seeking a 6th straight win over Northwestern. Northwestern allowed 227 air yards against Miami last week. So I think Malik Murphy will be able to open it up after his win over Liberty last week. He threw for 291 yards, completing 23 of 26 passes. And then finally, I'm going to go Georgia Southern at Nevada. Give me that FCS 1990 National Championship rematch, Division I AA. Give me them at Nevada laying the 1 and winning outright on the road. Tripp, anything you feel strongly about?
Man, I hate it when you do this with Duke because every time you pick those guys when nobody else likes them. They always seem like it just defies all logic. They always seem to cover. I like the Utah State play a lot. I think I'm probably going to ride that Iowa under one more time and see if it works out a little better this week. I was kind of leaning Auburn, but maybe Phil talked me out of that one.
Okay, so 2 for you. That sounds good. At Locks of the Dock, at Kyle Schass, at Phil Steele 042. Phil, it's been great, man. We'll talk to you next week for week 3. Enjoy all the college football and the NFL, too, tonight, starting with the Chiefs and the Ravens. Bears hosting the Titans at 1, and the Brownies, 4:25, hosting Dallas on Sunday. Wishing you and our Bears, Brownies, Bears, it's a Browns-Bears podcast. Why not? Phil Steele Show. Thanks, Phil.
All right, a lot of fun, guys. Have a great weekend.